Good morning, Boker Tov, everybody. Welcome to our daily morning Shiur and Chassidut online. Today we have a special subject in honor of the special day, which is today YUD TES KISLEV, the 19th day of Kislev, which is considered the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, as established by the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. The reason why, so we say Good Yom Tov to everyone. And today we're going to be learning the introduction to the Tanya. Believe it or not, learning an introduction to a book, usually the introduction to a sefer is considered something sidelined, but the main part of the sefer starts from Perek Aleph, chapter 1. In the sefer Tanya Kadisha, the not only is the introduction important, but also the Sharblat, which we're going to start with. It's the page even before the introduction, which is the gate. Every book pretty much has a gate, an entrance into the sefer, and so the Tanya Kadisha also has a special sharblat, which is the gate into the sefer. So if you open up your Tanya or you want to listen along, it's only a few lines, but it's very powerful. The Alter Rebbe says the name of the sefer. The name is Likutei Amarim. It's true, it's called Tanya because the first word of Perek Aleph is Tanya. There are other explanations as well, which we might talk about soon. I wanted to focus on the Sharblat, on this entry page, so to speak, into the Sefer Tanya, in honor of the special day of YUD TES KISLEV. Likutei Amarim. Now, anyone that's whether opened a Tanya or heard about Tanya, you've definitely heard about, just 1 second, please. You've definitely heard about you've definitely heard about how deep the Tanya is and how essential it is to each and every one of our lives and how it's prevalent to today's day and age in 2021 as well. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe, in all his humility, he calls it Likutei Amarim, a gathering of different sayings, of different insights. I'm sure we could have found a much more appropriate name which would express the awesomeness of this sefer. But because the Alter Rebbe was humble, that's what he called it, Likutei Amarim. It's only a compilation of different sayings, different chapters, different statements. Chelik Rishon, the first portion, Hanikra b'Shem Sefer Shel Beinonim. It's called the Sefer, the Book of Beinonim. It's very difficult to explain on one foot, but let's suffice to say, Beinoni is the intermediate path. So usually we're aware of the tzaddik. Tzaddik is the righteous one. The Rasha is the evil one, and then in the middle you have the Beinoni. So when you learn the Tanya, you'll understand that there's the halachic terminology of Beinoni, and then you have the inner interpretation of Beinoni. The halachic interpretation of Beinoni is 50-50, 50% tzaddik and 50% the other side. But according to the Chassidus, and you'll learn about it, in the first 14 chapters of Tanya, that the Beinoni is actually someone who is perfect in all his action. He doesn't do one sin, thought, speech, and deed. He doesn't do anything wrong. Nonetheless, what's his problem? Why is he not considered a tzaddik according to Pnimiyut, the inner interpretation? And the answer is because he still has a desire to do bad. But practically speaking, he's perfect. So the Alter Rebbe writes this sefer for Beinonim, as I believe it was Rabbi Hillel of Parich that said, Halavai Beinoni. He himself was practically a tzaddik. He said these two words were his expression, his desire. Halavai Beinoni. I wish I would be a Beinoni. And so Beinoni is a very, very, very high level. In fact, the students of the Chafetz Chaim once heard that the Rebbe Rashab called the Rechavia a Beinoni. and they were offended on his behalf because the Chavetz Chaim was obviously a tzaddik. Until one Chabad Chassid explained to him, really according to the Tanya, explained to the Talmidim what is a Beinoni. And a Beinoni is an extremely high level. For example, Rabbi, one of the greatest Amoraim, authors of the Gemara, said, Kigon Ana, for example, I am a Beinoni. So obviously Rabbi is not going to lie. That's not called being humble. Humble is when you say the truth, and you nevertheless say that it's not really my accomplishments. But when it comes to Rabbi, if he could say Ana Beinoni, for example, I am a Beinoni, that means that a Beinoni is at a very high level. So let's see what the Alter Rebbe says in 3 lines, what the Sefer Shel Beinonim is. Actually, the Alter Rebbe also wrote a book of the Sefer Shel Tzadikim, a book of Tzadikim, but he burnt it. He felt that it was I guess the world was unworthy of having such a Sefer, and so unfortunately we don't have the Sefer with us. So how does the Alter Rebbe categorize? What is the purpose? What is the goal? What is the Alter Rebbe trying to teach us going forward in the Tanya? So he says, Melukat, this is a compilation. In the first page of the Tanya, in the gate, it says, Melukat, that this book is gathered together, Mipis Farim, from the mouth of books, Umipis Sofrim, and from the mouth of authors, Kedoshei Elyon Nishmatam Eden, holy Neshamot, great tzaddikim, Miyusad. So firstly, by Chassidim, it's understood that these individuals are, number one, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich, and also put together from the teachings of the Maharal of Prague and other great tzaddikim. So this is based, Miusad, it's based upon Al Pasuk. Just 1 second, please. Okay, Miusad, this book is based on the verse in Parashat Nitzavim, Ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od, beficha uvilvavcha la'asoto. For this word, referring to the Torah, is very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart, to accomplish it. So right away in this pasuk we have beficha, in your mouth, which is dibur, speech, the 3 quote unquote levushim, garments through which we do everything, speech, ubilvavcha, in your thought, which represents ubilvavcha represents thought, la'asoto, to do it, which is obviously maaseh, which is actually practical. So we have in this pasuk how the Torah is close to us. That is the focus of the Alter Rebbe. He writes, this is what I'm going to be talking about this pasuk, how the entire Torah is really close to each and every one of us, as it says in the parsha over there in Nitzavim. Lo b'shamayim hi. It's not in the heavens that we have to think, oy vey, it's too far for us to reach, or it's not me'ever layam. It's not on the other side of the sea, of the ocean. We should say who's going to go get it, fetch it for us. Rather, it's close to each and every one of you, to each and every one of us. Leva'er heitev, to explain well. Echu karov ma'od. How is it close? B'derech arucha u'ketzara be'ezrat Hashem yitbarach. In a long and short way, with the help of Hashem. So first of all, until chapter 17, that is one interpretation of how it's ki karov elecha, how the Torah and Chassidus is close to every single person. And then, starting from Perek Yudchet, starting from chapter 18, uletosefet biur ba'er heitev, for in a much longer and more broader explanation in greater detail, the Alter Rebbe explains how it's possible that the entire Torah is so close to us. It's also important to remember what the Talmud says. This statement, the last 4 words, they allude to what the Talmud says, a story about a guy who was going on the way, and then he came to a fork, and he saw a little child, a wise child, walking by, and he asked him, which which path do I take in order to get to my destination? And so the boy said, well, it depends. Do you want the longer, shorter way or the shorter, longer way? So he didn't understand it. The boy explained that the one way is longer in meters, in feet, but it's shorter because it's smooth. The other way is shorter in meters, but there are a bunch of stumbling blocks on the way, and it's probably going to take you a longer time to get there, even though it's shorter. But because there's so many challenges and stumbling blocks on the way. So this is basically the hint. The Alter Rebbe is saying that if you follow along the roadmap of the Tanya, this will be derech arucha uktsara. It's the longer but shorter way. So it takes effort. It doesn't happen in one moment. But if you're focused on this path, then you know you're on the shorter and smoother path. When the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, he wrote it. When the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, he had a few parts of the Tanya. Number one, Likutei Amarim, which we just mentioned, the Shar Blat, the gate. Then he has Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, the gate of unification and belief, faith in Hashem. And then you have Igeret HaTshuva, which is the letter of Teshuvah, 12 chapters of how to do Teshuvah. Then later on, after the Alter Rebbe's passing, the Alter Rebbe's three sons decided to include also another portion into the Tanya, which is the Igeret HaKodesh. We have 32 letters, holy letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote. We had a shiur in them. You can read, I believe it was 5 of them so far we learned in the Tuesday night shiur over the summer. And you can look at the recordings on our YouTube channel. In the playlists for the Tanya and the Igeret HaKodesh. But right now, I'd like to turn a couple of pages. After all, the beginning of the Tanya is the Haskamot, which Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, the holy tzaddik, he wrote a Haskama. If you don't mind to please type into the chat how to say Haskama in English. And also from Rabbi Yehuda Leib Cohen, who today is buried in Anipoli as well. And I had the zechut to go with my wife when we were there several years ago for Pesach. We went to the kever, they're buried next to each other. So that is part of today's Tanya. Today being YUD TES KISLEV, we start the cycle of Tanya today. Every day there's a daily Tanya. You can follow it either if you have your sefer at home of Tanya or on our website, Jerusalem Chabad endorsement. Thank you, Tovia. You can look also every day on our website, JerusalemChabad.org. We have where it says daily, under adult education, it says daily study, and you can go through the entire Chitat. So starting from today, on Shabbos, you can do it on Motzei Shabbos, right after Shabbos, and you can learn the Tanya and the Chumash and the Tehillim and also the Rambam of every single day. So here is the reason why the Alter Rebbe needed to have endorsements, because at first glance, everyone that just picked up the Sefer realized right away how great and holy the Tanya is. But unfortunately, there were people who forged the Tanya, and the Alter Rebbe felt a necessity to send it to the Tanya to Rabbi Zusha of Anipoli, his colleague and friend, another Talmud of the Maggid of Mizrich, and also Rabbi Yehuda Leib Cohen, that they both wrote similar things. And first of all, they write that since the Kuntureisim, quote unquote, the booklets have been forged, therefore, there many mistakes have come into the Tanya. Yeah, and therefore, there's a very strong or perhaps prohibition that no one to print the Tanya. In fact, the Rebbe explains in a number of Farbrengens that this prohibition continues until today, even though you can see in the page prior to this, you can see how the Moda Rabbah, that the printers, Almana v'Achim Ra'im, that they printed the Tanya, I believe it was only for 5 years they were not allowed to write. But the Rebbe says that these 5 years are automatically renewed, and you need to have permission from the central office at Chabad in order to print the Tanya. At Chabad of Rechavia, we had the great zchut on the day of the 200th yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, which was in a month. It's going to be Chavdala Teves, and it will be 8 years since we printed the Tanya over here in Rechavia. And we had to contact Rabbi Jacobson, who unfortunately just passed away just a couple of months ago. And he was the one who gave permission. He had the authority to give permission. Today there are over 7,500 prints of the Tanya. Obviously, each one is imprinted in many copies, but over 7,500 places in the world that the Tanya has been printed. In fact, the Rebbe came out with a campaign in the early 80s that we should print the Tanya in every country, in every city, and even in every community, every neighborhood that there are Jews living there. The Tanya, when we printed the Tanya over here in Rechavia, we brought Rabbi we brought one of the shluchim over here in Israel who participated in the early 80s in printing the Tanya in Lebanon during the war. And then we had a gentleman who stood up, an elderly gentleman, I didn't know who he was a guest. And he said that he remembers when he was a soldier in Lebanon, how the Chabadniks came in crossfire in the mitzvah tanks, and they printed the Tanya, and that brought a great bracha. And that's what the Rebbe said, that in printing the Tanya, just even the printing of the Tanya, because the Tanya is a holy sefer, that makes it we should be able to, it brings bracha to the neighborhood and to the area and to the city and to the country. And then Rabbi Yehuda Leib HaKohen says something interesting. He says, first he compliments the Alter Rebbe, Chachmas Adam Torah Pnei Haaretz, the wisdom of man shines the face of the world, of the land, when he sees that the work of Harav Agon, Ish Elokim, Kadosh V'Tor, the godly man, holy and pure, Chassid V'Anav, a Chassid and a humble person who learned by the Maggid of Mezrich, and who received ultimately from the Baal Shem Tov. And he says that no one should print this sefer unless they have permission. And it's interesting that the Reb Zusha of Anipali, when he finishes off, before he signs his name, he writes the date of when this endorsement was given. And this was in Parshat Kitavo, Shnat Pidutenu Leprat Katan, Pidutenu. If you look at the numerical value of Pidutenu, of these 7 Hebrew letters, then it comes to the year. It's the exact number of year, which is probably 5,556. But it's interesting, Pidutenu, that it's known that I believe it was Reb Zusha that said that we will come towards Mashiach with this special sefer of Tanya. And now we are in Tafshin Pei base, which is the Pei is also which represents Pada, to redeeming. By the way, it's Teishnat Pada v'Shalom. So hopefully that this day should be the day of the redemption through Mashiach, and there's a zechut of so many thousands of people, and perhaps even millions of people that learn the Tanya and that participate today in the sale of many Hasidic many thousands of hundreds of thousands of Hasidic Svarim in the Binyanei HaUmah. This can be a great zechut. And finally, I'd like to go through the haskama, the endorsement, quote unquote, of the children, the sons of the Alter Rebbe. I just want to mention that what I'm going to say now, the haskama of the children of the Alter Rebbe is tomorrow's Tanya. And because the Tanya is divided up almost the same, but differently for a regular year or for a leap year. But since this year is a leap year, so up until now, we finished the cycle of the previous year. But for now, when we're learning the Tanya, pay attention to do the cycle of the leap year, because there are going to be 2 Adars coming up in a few months. And so this endorsement, which is endorsed by the Mittler Rebbe and his brothers, Rabbi Chaim Avram and Rabbi Moshe, they write as follows. Since we have decided to give permission to print the Sefer, that everyone should learn Divrei Elokim Chaim, the words of the living God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Alter Rebbe wrote. So therefore, we have decided, in order to bring people closer to Yiddishkeit, decided to add also different letters that the Alter Rebbe wrote, as I mentioned before, which is called Igeret HaKodesh, to teach the people the way how to act and the way how to, and the neshama, the meaning of how to connect to Hashem. And some of the details they write, some of the details that will be explained in the Igeret HaKodesh will really explain that which was written in the first part of the Tanya, Likutei Amarim, which basically also includes the Kunters Achron right at the end of the Tanya that we finished yesterday. The Kunters Achron, especially that part, explains certain parts of the Likutei Amarim. As we have a rule in Chazal that Divrei Torah aniyim b'makom achad v'ashirim b'makom acher. The words of Torah sometimes are a little bit less explanatory, and other places they're more explanatory. So it makes sense to complete the Tanya to show different places where the Alter Rebbe himself explains certain deep concepts that may be a little less explained earlier and better explained later on. And of course, they write that they have a very strong, very severe cherem. These are very strong words of that no one should that there's no healing for this. That no one should dare print the Sefer for at least 5 years from the date below. And as I said before, that this continues till today. And it's interesting to note that each one of the sons signs their name, the son of their father, but with different titles for the Alter Rebbe. And what's explained is that each one signed their name, signed their name is son of the father according to their own level, according to their own connection to the Alter Rebbe. So the Mittler Rebbe, the oldest son, who later became the second Chabad Rebbe, he writes his name Ben Adoni Avi Mari Rabbi Hagona Chasid Kadosh Yisroel Marana V'Rabbana, and the Reb Chaim Avram writes that his name, the son of Adoni Avi Mari Rabbi Hagona Chasid Marana V'Rabbana. So it's missing over the Kadosh Yisroel, and Rabbi Moshe takes out the Marana V'Rabbana. In other words, each one signs his name according to his own relationship. It's not just signing a name, but it's a very meaningful. It's a very meaningful way, a connection, a relationship with their father, the Alter Rebbe. So thank you very much for joining us. Bezrat Hashem, this afternoon at 4:00, there are going to be 4 shiurim in English in Nachlaot at Tiferet Menachem. The address is 29 Yitzchak Barashi, and then at 8:00, each one will be every hour on the hour. And at 8:00 will be a Farbrengen in Hebrew with Rabbi Groner, the son of the Rebbe's secretary, and Rabbi Leibel Groner. So his son's name is Rabbi Mendy Groner from Kiryat Gat. So we look forward to seeing everybody here. In Mirz Hashem, it's going to be amazing. Have a good Yantif. And tomorrow we're going to continue. We're going to start the actual introduction to explain the introduction for the next couple of days. Thank you. All the best. 9:15 every morning. Yasher Koach.